For the next Fireside Chat, I'd like to welcome two people. The first is Rob Verkerk. He's one of the founders and the leaders of the Alliance for Natural Health, which is a serious organization both here in Europe and in America. So, Rob, you want to come up and join us? And also... Also here, one of the cool things about this conference is that there's going to be ripple effects. I can feel them happening already, but I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with docu-series style content that was in the health world. There's been things like The Truth About Cancer and so forth. Another person that's joining us, there's actually a couple of docu-series happening right now, but one that Jason's making called The Human Longevity Project, and Jason is going to the blue zones and other areas all around the world and has brought his camera crew to this conference. So that's coming out early next year, and there's going to be a bunch of content that came from this weekend. So please welcome Jason Prall. So Jason, I want to start with you. We started today with Maskell talking about the blue zones, and you've actually been to them and see what's going on now. And I'd love for you to just sort of give the audience an update on you've been in the nutrition world, you've been a nutritionist, you've taught people how to eat and what to eat. What have you seen in the blue zones that surprised you?
Yeah, I think we've been to so far Okinawa and Nicoya, Costa Rica, and some of the things that we found in the blue zones is they're changing. That when you look at a blue zone, we're looking at what happened in the last 90, 100 years. So as things have progressed and as we see modern society impact these blue zones, we're starting to see some of the negative consequences, particularly coming from the U.S. culture. We have things like McDonald's and Starbucks showing up in Okinawa, and this is having sort of a negative impact, and they actually have a term for this. They call it Hamburger Syndrome. So they're kind of aware that this is going on. They don't really like it per se, and there's actually more derogatory T-shirts that they're making. F Starbucks, these type of things. So they really don't like it, but it's becoming a part of their society. So some of these things are changing, and so they really have to look at what's really impacting these blue zones, and are they going to be blue zones in 30 years?
So you can see that the areas that potentially have already got it right are moving in the wrong direction. Hopefully Guernsey moving in the right direction. Maybe you could just give the audience your feedback on what you've seen so far here today.
I mean, it's been amazing so far. I think the themes that go beyond some of the basic aspects of health that we've seen in the blue zones, things like purpose, community, the focus on health in a broad perspective. Purpose is one of these fascinating things that we found in the blue zones. We asked somebody, a 94-year-old lady in Loma Linda, which technically isn't a blue zone, but it's a healthy area in the States. And I said, you're 94, your kids are out of the house, you don't really have a strong community of your friends that you had when you were younger. What keeps you going? And she said, well, I've got to learn this song for the violin class on Wednesday. And for me, that was super profound, right? Because we think of purpose as something that's got to be this big goal, this big thing that we have to find in our life, right? And what we find again and again is that purpose can be something so small but so meaningful. And things like music, obviously a very, very healthy thing to practice, especially for the brain. And another lady, 97 years old in Okinawa, she was climbing her orange trees at 95. Before her kids told her to stop climbing the orange trees to pick the oranges because you might get hurt. And she said, I'm fine. She's living independently, and her purpose is to take care of her garden all around. So purpose is such a big thing, but it can be so small. It doesn't have to be this massive thing that we have to focus on.
Absolutely. One thing, Rob, that's been clear with your organization has been the purpose of the Alliance for Natural Health and what you've been doing. You've been doing with this for more than 30 years. How aligned is what you've heard today with what you've been working for that long?
It really is fully aligned. I mean, my story is really from the agricultural side into the health side and then backwards and forwards. And one of the things we've heard today is community, community, community. There's not many people here, even though there are several doctors in the house, no one's repaired this man's sore throat. So, Rangan, that's been upsetting me all day. But no one is saying it's technology other than the technology that helps mediate communication.
Yeah.
We're not looking for silver bullets anymore. And one of the processes that has occurred through this kind of myopic process that has got us this far is compartmentalizing information. And whether we now look, we've done a lot of work with traditional systems of medicine. So when I go to India or go to China, everyone there is saying, why are you breaking up our system? So, you know, in Ayurveda, they're pretty upset that panchakarma has been put into, you know, fancy fitness centers and yoga into with something that personal trainers are doing, and herbal medicine is a discrete thing, and you can't talk about food being a medicine. The whole system exists together. And the sooner that we understand that the human body is just another part of an ecological environment, hats off to what Mike was saying. You know, we've got to understand that this system is replicated many times elsewhere. Being someone that's passionate about nature isn't about being a Luddite. You know, the view that governments like to put forward that GDP is tied up into creating industries that are involved in innovative breakthrough technologies in healthcare.
Yeah.
And yet here we hear, and this is certainly our view, that actually most of the answers are known. So we have really become, we've replaced, if you like, religion with science. But we look at the wrong parts of the science. When we look at the right parts of the science, whether we see a blue zone community or we see blue zone individuals living in pretty diverse communities, those people have a knowledge base that allows them to make certain selections. And this is really what's fantastic about today. It isn't necessarily medicine that's going to resolve those problems. It is information, communication, coaching that allows people to make sound decisions. And you know, one of the things that hasn't been mentioned is the media. The reality is that if you try and develop a perspective on what is going on in the world and you are reliant only on what you see on television, except when Rangan's on, and what you read in the newspapers, you're going to have such a distorted view of the world outside there. And so the subculture that's developed through the internet, one of our concerns obviously is how that becomes regulated potentially. But the solutions are there. We just need to find them, and we need examples within isolated communities, but also within much wider communities who are really not the averages. We are all outliers, and let's just have more outliers out there.
So what I hear you saying is that if the Guernsey Free Press gives a bad review for today, you should burn them down. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, or just start demonstrating. Yeah.
You know, I want to talk a little bit about complexity and simplicity because, you know, Jason, we were having an amazing conversation the other day at dinner with Michelle, and you were talking about, you know, so you've been a clinician and going in and looking what you referred to as the black box of the human body and trying to work out what's going on. And I think what we're starting to see is the human body is so infinitely complex that reductionism just doesn't do justice to come out these with the solutions, and yet the solutions to these complex problems are actually very simple. And I'd love for you to share some of those thought processes, because Rob and I just did an interview for the upcoming Genetics Summit, and a lot of the things that we're talking about, the interconnection of genes and the environment, is very complex. But I think you shared something that I think the community would love to hear about, the simplicity of solutions to complex problems.
Yeah, about 5 years ago, I switched from my engineering career to functional health. And so I'm not a licensed physician, but I still can practice this functional model of health. And the more I started learning about the biochemistry, the microbiome, mitochondria, how the brain functions, the nervous system, for every question that I answered, I got 10 new questions. And for every time I answered those, I got 10 more. And so what that taught me was that the body is infinitely complex. The deeper I look, the more complex it's going to get. Now, we can find answers in that, and that's beneficial. But if we get stuck in that model, we are going to get stuck in the black box. And what I learned was that if I just trust that this is doing what it's supposed to do, it knows how to do it. If I learn to trust that, then it took me back to my engineering days as a sort of mechanical manufacturing quality control engineer. And when we would get poor product on the back end of a process, my job was to go figure out what happened in that process. And so you go through the assembly line or the whole production process, figure out what went wrong, right? You're using statistics, a very complex process. And I learned a very hard lesson in my early days after doing a lot of analysis on a process. And I couldn't figure out what the heck was causing this poor product. And then the last thing I checked was the input, the raw material that came into the plant before all the process happened. And that taught me, and I triggered my memory back to health. And I said, well, wait, let's just trust this black box knows what it's doing. And let's fix the inputs to this black box. Let's fix relationships. Let's fix traumas. Let's fix our environment. And if you start doing that, you start to see amazing results out of this black box. And Sachin hit on this, and Rangan chatted about this with the complexities of the diseases that he's working with. And it's very, very complex when you get in that level. If you don't address the inputs as well, then it's very difficult to get the output. So, focusing on the inputs is really, really simple. It's so simple. Good sleep, good connections, reducing trauma, reducing stress, calming down, slowing down. These are the things that are going to change the way we get to 100 eventually, because it will happen. And so focus your efforts there, and you're going to see enormous change on the outside.
Absolutely. Rob, I wanted to follow on from that. It seems like there's these sort of two converging forces that are happening simultaneously. There's the sort of command and conquer, supplements aren't available now, the big brother is sort of taking over. And on the other side, you have sort of, I think a lot of what we've covered today, just sort of communities not asking permission, doing the right thing, and sort of independently creating the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, to quote Charles Eisenstein. Who's going to win?
Well, I think one of the underlying processes that has gone in society, that's why I think we've seen people like Donald Trump be elected in, is trust. So we see that there's a lack of trust in the corporations, there's a lack of trust in governments, there's also a lack of trust in doctors. And as many people are beginning to see, that lack of trust actually brings new opportunities. One of the reasons that I think that we keep hearing the C word, the community word, is that actually what we mean with a group of people that we're close to is we trust you.
Yeah.
When we accept that globalization has happened and industrialization has happened, there are a number of things that because they're so complex, we can't control. So we talked about this the other day, we look at the escalating exposure that we have to environmental chemicals. In the last 10 years, we've seen 75% of all the inclusions to the CAS registry that gives a number for every single compound that's been produced. These are industrial chemicals, many of which end up in the air and the water. If we look at our food supply, there are plans afoot that the world gets divvied up into different regions where you can't really run local food projects if you want to do what governments want to do. So you have to let your tomatoes come from Spain, your cucumbers and peppers from Holland. When that process happens, you lose control, you lose trust. Most people got some idea of whether a food is grown in soil or not, but actually most people don't realize that nearly all the salad vegetables they're consuming are hydroponically grown. They've never seen a grain of soil. There is no rhizosphere around those roots. The reason why they taste so watery is because they are not nutrient dense. They're missing a whole pile of different compounds in them. They also don't necessarily understand very much because it's all hidden from us by the companies. What happens from the time a plant is harvested till it arrives in your home. They're also not necessarily taught that the process of leaving it in your fridge or cooking your food in a particular way will damage the food. I recently had a meeting in Brussels with the Danish representative saying, look, WHO has classified processed meats as carcinogens, yet it's okay to not put that warning statement on the processed meat so people pick this stuff up, put it in the sandwiches, and give it to their kids to go to school. And the response was, Dr. Verkerk, it's just politics. And so, we have to work our way through. And I think grassroots pressure, which is something we're very much involved with at A&H, is how you change things. And what's happening today is really a big part of that.
Absolutely. What would you like to see from what you've seen today for both of you? What do you think are sort of like the easiest takeaways to, get us towards more what you've seen of sort of like the best of the blue zones that you've had a chance to see?
I mean, I think creating good connections, honestly. That's what we see in the blue zones, is that the family connections are there, the local community connections are there. So if you've got a poor relationship with your mother or your brother or a friend, work on that, fix it, or let it go. And don't let that bog you down, because the relationships are the most important thing. So work on the relationships, and that will empower you to take steps across the board with your health.
Rob, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we've got to spend a lot more time thinking how we feel. It's actually something in a doctor's office that we hear a lot less of. People forget to ask how they feel, and when we ask each other how we feel, in most of the industrialized Western world, we say we feel fine, even though we're half dying inside. So we got to learn to be really honest with that, because it is a very British thing. But hang on, the Americans haven't necessarily got it right as well. High five! I got cancer. I'm dying next week. The reality is how we feel is a very, very complex expression of psychoneuroimmunology, a whole bunch of processes inside us. And if we can all aspire to feel better, which means getting a hell of a lot of things right in our lives, working out what the priorities for the individual are, individualizing the advice, because there isn't, if you believe the Daily Mail health pages, you'd believe that you could give one piece of advice to everyone, but how come they change their minds next week? Yeah. So we need to know better, and I think genomics gives us one of the open doors to this, how we can use technology in a sensible way, so we can, if you like, individualize more general advice about all aspects that make us feel better as people.
Beautiful. We've run out of time here, but the next session, the last session, is on the future. And I just want to touch on one thing that I feel like I have to communicate, because you said something here about trust. And, as humans, we use relationships as a proxy for trust. We have to develop trust with people by getting to know them, and after a period of getting to know them, we trust the way they think about the world and how they think. I mentioned earlier that the technology of the blockchain, and I'm sure most of you are unfamiliar with it, but I think you'll hear more and more about it. And one of the things that is part of the blockchain is that it is a technology where trust is actually implicit in the system. And that is very, very different from what we have. If Jason and I have a conversation on Facebook Messenger, we may think we're having a private conversation, but ultimately Facebook owns all of that data. And what you're going to start to see with blockchain integrating into systems is that trust is built into the system. And what it allows for is a phrase that I sort of spoke about the other day. I certainly didn't come up with it, but it's this idea of, in healthcare, if you have an idea of distributed socialism. And in this concept is that the power doesn't reside in any one person's hands. The power resides in the power of the community using the common system. And I would highly recommend to anyone here who is interested in trust, building systems with trust inherent in them. I don't think that we have time to build trust by the old method. And the old method is development of the relationships, because this takes time. I'm very, very excited and bullish on the power of the blockchain. And if I went to a conference about 2 months ago which talked about all the non-financial tech ways that that blockchain is being used, and you would be staggered to understand all of the ways that it's being used in supply chain management, in organizations of like art and music and science. And this is a new concept. You may not get it for a while, but I would recommend to anyone, if you're really interested in the future of trust and creation of communities, get involved in understanding the potential of the blockchain, because the reason why Bitcoin and these kind of things are taking off is people realize that trust has been abused by central authority, and there is a potential for a technology that does not have that potential. And I went to this event, and a female friend of mine wrote a review. We were at the same event, and she felt like, and these were her words, that blockchain was the technology of the divine feminine. And she said that because she felt that there was an immutable trust that was part of it, and the power of it, if you think about it as a currency, is not based on sort of like the patriarchal command and control system, but is based on the power of community using something. The value of the Bitcoin and the blockchain goes up as it's used by different people and the size of the community. And I know there's a lot of forward-thinking people in here. We haven't had, I spoke about a little bit of what we want to do, but I would say like there may be things that could be organized, even the vegetable stuff that you're talking about here on Guernsey, that could be organized through a system like that where trust is built into the system. And when you see what is possible with that sort of technology, that it will blow away everything that we've ever seen before. So I have to add that in because we're moving into the next segment, which is about the future. You're going to hear about a lot of cool stuff, but if you're a change maker and you're interested in building trust at scale, that's the technology for you. Thank you both for being here.